Hello, government students. Today we're going to be doing Notes 5.3 on interest groups. Your essential question: what is the role of an interest group in the United States government? All right, everyone. So, interest groups are private organizations whose members share certain views and they work to shape public policy. So, public policy is all of the goals that a government sets for a given time period, for a given year, for a given session, and the various courses of action it pursues as it attempts to realize these goals. So, these interest groups are sometimes called pressure groups because they put pressure on public officials and agencies to adopt their views into law. So, political parties are different from interest groups. They differ in three different ways in their nominations, in their focus, and in their interest. So, political parties are responsible for the nomination process. So, political parties nominate candidates that they want to be elected into office. Whereas interest groups aren't necessarily interested in who gets elected into office, but they're hoping to influence the nomination of whoever the candidate may be. So, they want to make sure that the candidate for whichever party supports their interests. So, for instance, we have some interest groups like the California Teachers Association. They want to make sure that whoever is getting nominated, particularly on the Democratic side, really supports public education. Whereas we have interest groups like the NRA, the National Rifle Association, they want to make sure whoever the Republican nominee is, whoever that candidate is, really supports Second Amendment rights. The primary focus differs as well. Political parties are interested in winning elections. That's their goal. They nominate candidates, they want them to win elections, and they want to be in charge in government. Whereas interest groups are interested in influencing the policies that are created by whoever gets elected. And the scope of interest is also different. Political parties are focused on a wide range of issues. They're not focused on a single issue, whereas interest groups tend to be focused on smaller issues that their members are concerned about. So, like our two examples that I just used, California Teachers Association, obviously, they're concerned about education, they're concerned about children, childcare, things like that. The NRA is concerned about Second Amendment rights. All right, so the functions of interest groups. They raise awareness about public affairs or issues that are concerning people at large. So, right now, the Teachers Association, they're really focused on the safety of returning back to schools. Of course, we all want to return back to school and be in person, but we want to make sure that that's safe for everyone as well. Interest groups represent people who share attitudes rather than those who share geography. So they might not be specifically located like the CTA, our example here, is California focused, but it's all across the state of California. There are teachers unions like the National Education Association that's all across the 50 states. Interest groups like the Human Rights Campaign, that is for LGBTQ rights, that's all across the United States. So they're not necessarily just for a specific location. Black Lives Matter could be considered an interest group, and they are, again, across the United States and across the world, really. Interest groups provide specialized information to government agencies, so they have either workers or knowledge about specific industries that can help the government when they're creating policy. They can help get people politically active. They can help get people out to the polls. They can help get people to donate to specific campaigns. And they can keep tabs on agencies and officials so they can make sure that people are following up on their campaign promises and making people aware when they're not. There are a lot of criticisms for interest groups. Some people have said that the influence of interest groups far outweigh their size, so they have a lot bigger influence than their proportion of their size or potentially their importance, depending on how you look at it. It can be difficult to tell who or how many people are actually served by an interest group, and they don't always represent the values of the people that they claim to speak for. Most interest groups have been founded on the basis of an economic interest, like business or labor or agriculture. Some are specifically in a geographic area. Some are based on a cause or an idea, such as the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is an interest group that's based on environmental protection. So they really want to make sure that they're taking care of the environment. Some promote the welfare of certain groups, like the AARP. They are an interest group that takes care of retired citizens. And then some are run by religious organizations. A public interest group is an interest group that seeks to institute certain policies that will benefit most of the people in the country, whether or not they belong to that organization. So, some of these interest groups here, the ACLU is one we learned about in the film that we watched in Unit 4. So, the ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union. They focus on protecting the civil rights of Americans in this country. So, while they may not specifically be working to benefit you, they're benefiting all Americans by fighting for civil rights. Now is the National Organization of Women. They fight for women's rights in this country. And of course, we know women are 51% of the population, but policies that can benefit women can benefit everyone. And then the AARP, that's the group for retired people in the United States, so our elderly population. While we all may not be elderly, hopefully we will all get to that age one day, so that will benefit all of us eventually. Interest groups can influence public opinion as well. So, interest groups can supply information in support of their interests. They can build a positive image for the group and they can promote public policy. So, for an example, HRC, this equality sign right here, that is the symbol for the Human Rights Campaign. And they worked really hard over the course of the last 20 years or so, trying to get LGBTQ equal rights. So they've been, of course, they've been going longer than 20 years, but they've made a huge amount of progress in the last 20 years, having marriage equality get passed in all 50 states and preventing things like um, the transition. Gosh, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what it's called. But there are programs that some states have that try to transition their children from being LGBTQ to being heterosexual, which has been considered to be torture in most places. And so it has been outlawed in a lot of states in the United States today. Interest groups also use propaganda. So I know you learned about propaganda in your English class, but just a quick refresher, propaganda is a technique of persuasion that's aimed at influencing individual or group behaviors. So propaganda creates a belief, which may be true or may be false. Propaganda disregards information that does not support its conclusion. It's not objective, it presents one side only. Sometimes it refers to things like name calling or inflammatory labels. So, an example, since we were just talking about HRC and the Human Rights Campaign, marriage equality for LGBTQ couples, when marriage equality was getting passed in a lot of states, there was propaganda against it as well. So, here you can see this was a mailer that went out in Maryland that families were under attack. If we have same sex marriage, then that's going to hurt the American families. And the same argument was made here in this comic strip over here for interracial marriage in the 1960s, and before then, it was illegal in a lot of states to have an interracial marriage. And so then the same argument was being had in the early 2000s for same sex marriage, for marriage equality. But of course, now both of those are legal because of the Supreme Court. Political action committees, which are known as PACs, they can influence parties and elections. They can raise money and they can give it to candidates, or they can support candidates in elections to further their goals. And lobbying is an activity which a group pressures legislators and influences the legislative process. So, lobbying carries beyond the legislature. So, it's brought into government agencies, it's in the executive branch, it's in the courts. Nearly all interest groups have lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and then they have them here in Sacramento as well. So, lobbyists are trying to influence elected officials. They can do that by sending articles or reports, information to office holders. They testify in legislative committees when bills are being drafted. They can bring grassroots pressures. They can do email campaigns or letter campaigns, phone calls from constituents. They rate candidates and then they publicize their ratings, and then they can also donate to campaigns and make campaign contributions. All right, everyone, and that is the end of your notes on interest groups. So go ahead and write a summary, a couple sentences about what you learned.